Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about the long-term future. The Economist has just published a book which I've edited called Mega Change, The World in 2050. And a lot of the themes in that book are extremely pertinent to the theme of our conversation today. Now, this book, just to give you a sense of it, it consists of 20 essays, 20 contributions from colleagues from The Economist, current and former journalists at The Economist, each one on a different theme, very varied. And first of all, just to give a sense of what do we mean by mega change? What does this signify? Well, essentially, it's some of the stuff that Vijay was talking about, change on a massive scale happening very quickly. And give you a few examples. One very obvious one is population, and that's actually the foundation stone for the book, the first chapter. It took the world 250,000 years to reach its first billion in population, and that was around 1800. The latest extra billion took just a dozen years, and that landmark was reached if you go by the official United Nations count last October. So that's an extraordinary change. By 2050, the rate of growth is actually going to even out, slow down a bit, but still an extra 2.3 or so billion people in the world, over 9 billion people. This chart needs a bit of updating probably. But that's, again, a huge change to adjust to. And those are just the overall numbers. If you look beneath the numbers, there are some really important and interesting trends which drive a lot of other developments that we need to be concerned about and worry about over the coming decades. For example, the world is going to be a lot older, 9 years or so on average older by 2050 than today. A lot more urban, 70% or so, some say more, urban compared with just over half today. And bear in mind that for the massive, overwhelming part of human history, we have been rural people. We have lived in the country. Urbanization happened relatively late. And where we are, the balance of where people are in the world is changing very dramatically. So I find this quite striking as a European that in 1950, we Europeans were over 20% of the world's population. Africans were about 10%. Those proportions are going to be completely reversed, more than reversed by 2050. So if you're wondering, for example, about half of the extra people between now and then will be in Africa. If you're wondering where the workers of tomorrow are going to be, the workforce of tomorrow, a lot of them are going to be in Africa. There's a lot more behind the population story, but this drives an awful lot of the other changes and developments in economics, business, society, and so on. Second example of mega change, social revolution. So Rosie the Riveter, we put on the cover of The Economist some time ago to mark the moment when women passed the 50% mark as a share of the workforce in America. A huge landmark, and the economic empowerment of women is perhaps the greatest social change that has happened in recent times in the Western world. And there are other changes, big social shifts in attitudes, as you see here. And one of the, I think, crucial questions for the coming decades is how those sorts of changes play out or continue to play out in the rest of the world, in the developing world. Very important for the development of countries in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and so on. And a third and very obvious example of mega change, speaking here in California, is technology. Facebook, from nowhere to 800 plus million members, and if that were a country, it would be the third biggest on the planet already, behind India and China. And the iPad, we just had the launch of the latest version to huge demand, creating needs that we didn't even know we existed. So, how do these huge changes, huge trends play out into the future? Obviously, predicting what will be happening in the decades ahead is an extremely perilous thing to do, very easy to get it wrong. I would argue it's a necessary thing to do, we can perhaps discuss that later. But I wanted to talk about just a few of the ideas or themes that emerge from these contributions to the book that I think are interesting for today. First of all, there's the danger of extrapolation, which risks being proved wrong because of disruptive events. So it's not just a question of seeing the trend that happened in the past, it can be disrupted. That's certainly true of population trends. The population forecasts that I just mentioned aren't just straight extrapolations. The actual rate of growth of population is going to be slowing down. But it's especially true in other areas. Here's one little example. Obesity is a big and growing problem in the West. And this chart shows the growing problem of obesity in America. But are people just going to go on getting bigger and bigger and bigger until we pop? I hope not, and my wife tells me every day that I certainly shouldn't. So one hopes that that is an example of a trend that will not continue, but it's a crucial one, actually, for the future of our health systems, particularly in the rich world. Another very topical example, this question of inequality, Vijay mentioned it, risen to the top of the political agenda here in America, also in many European countries, and indeed in some of the emerging economies such as China and India. It's a very live issue. So the question of where will inequality be in 40 or so years' time, and the article, very interesting article by our economics editor, Zanny Minton-Beddoes, suggests that actually some of the trends that we've seen in previous decades are reversing and will reverse in the future. So if you look at the world as a whole, there's actually what some people call a great leveling going on because of the emergence from poverty of billions of people in places like China and India. Overall equality in the world is being reduced, and even in the rich economies, there is a strong possibility that in the coming decades, the sorts of trends we've seen where the very, very rich grab a really hugely disproportionate share of the wealth, that too will change. And you look back to earlier periods where there was such unequal division of wealth, when the robber barons were grabbing a huge share of it, with American industrialization, income tax, inheritance tax came along, social policy changed, and that made a difference. And that sort of thing may well happen again. And then a final very crucial area where we may not see a straight extrapolation is the role of the state. A very, very big issue. The state becoming bigger and bigger, demands on it through pensions, through healthcare, and so on. A very live political issue again. But this is an area where, again, we may well see there is obviously huge potential to make the state more efficient, smarter, slimmer, better. And who knows, that may happen in the decades ahead. Second theme from the book, and it pervades so much of so many of the contributions. It's a leitmotif, if you like, China's rise. I love this graphic. It shows actually, it's a sort of Mount Fuji-like shape. And it shows the previous rising Asia star, Japan, as a share of the US economy. And you could see that in the 1980s, when everybody was worrying in America that Japan was becoming was going to overtake America and be number one, and it was shooting up as a share of America's economy. And then suddenly, Japan struggled, and it came down and down and down. Japan has had two very difficult decades. And the rising star now, obviously, is China. That's the yellow line at the bottom. It's just overtaken Japan to become the number 2 economy in the world. And it's clearly China's rise is destined to be one of the big driving forces of change in the world. When will China overtake America? Perhaps as soon as 2018. That could really, I think that will be a mind-concentrating moment for many people in this country. The idea that America is no longer number one, is no longer the biggest economy in the world. China, of course, will still be a lot poorer than America, but very soon it's going to be the biggest economy in the world. And I think, again, if you look at this in the sweep of history, it's interesting to to think that actually this really is a case of back to the future, that for much of history, Asia was the overwhelming producer of, or the overwhelming share of the world economy. Over half of production came from Asia. And then the Industrial Revolution happened. It happened in Europe first, then America rose, and now that's going into reverse again. Asia is rising up very, very fast again. By 2050, it will again be producing over half of the world's output in all likelihood, and it will be back to roughly where it was in the 1820s. Third theme to bring in, black swan. This is a particularly beautiful example of a black swan. Natalie Portman. Black swan, as you know, is the phrase that Nassim Taleb used for unpredictable, unforeseen events. And it's really one of the reasons why it's so difficult to stand up and talk about 2050, because so many things can and no doubt will happen to throw off all expectations. And maybe we'll talk about some possible black swan events, which will, no doubt will come in less welcome shapes than this. But one I would just mention that I think is worth keeping an eye on, and that is government policy. The possibility that governments do, by accident or under pressure, really, really stupid things that cause real trouble for the world. And it's happened before. The last period of globalization at the beginning of the last century came to an end when protectionism came in and the world turned in on itself, and we had war and we had disaster. So it could well happen again. A few things that I would just pick out from the book, though, they're not exactly black swans, but may surprise you, other sorts of surprisings. Just a few examples. France, by 2050, could have a bigger population than Germany, a big psychological change for Europe. A booming Middle East, because if you look at the demographic profile of the Middle East, it will have a very favorable ratio of working age population to dependent children and elderly. So it has the potential to benefit from, if productive work can be found for these people to be undergoing the sort of boom that Asia has had in the recent years. China, meanwhile, has the opposite. China is growing old very rapidly, or will start to grow old very rapidly in the not-too-distant future, so that by 2050, it will actually be an older society. This is partly because of the one-child policy that you're all familiar with. It will be an older society, not only than America, but also than Europe. And its growth rate will be a very average sort of growth rate, probably because of this, not the double digits that we're all so accustomed to see today, but something much more like 2.5%. So it's in a real race to grow rich before it grows old. Nigeria, meanwhile, maybe nearly 400 million Nigerians, nearly as many Nigerians by 2050 as Americans. And then some sort of what seemed to be science fiction-like things, but seem perfectly plausible, actually, the discovery of alien life, the rebirth of an extinct species. And then a final theme, doom or boom. This was very much what Vijay was touching on before. We have what he called the wicked challenges, these huge challenges of how to feed 9+ billion people, how to husband our resources adequately, how to cope with the threats of disease and so on. And innovation is the key to this. And just a few areas where I think innovation has, we're going to no doubt talk about all of these today, particular attention. There's an excellent contribution to the book by Jeff Carr, our science editor, which highlights biology as the really exciting area of science over the coming decades. Not exactly forget about chemistry and physics, but biology has huge excitement and potential because of the marriage of DNA sequencing, computing power, nanotechnology. So I think particularly in the healthcare area, that is tremendously exciting. This was, I think, a fascinating cover from The Economist not so long ago about the idea of three-dimensional printing, additive manufacturing, which has the potential to totally change the way that we make things, and not just technically, but also the whole process, the whole business process of manufacturing. And then lastly, a huge thing, food production. We have to produce more food. Not only is the world's population going to be 30% bigger, but the demand for food will be perhaps 70% bigger, because among the larger population will be a greater share of richer people who have more demand for food. So that is a huge challenge, and innovation will be needed to raise productivity in the food area. So those are some ideas from the book. Just to finish up with, I set myself my own challenge, which was to imagine in 2050 what would be the companies, the biggest companies. We heard someone on the video saying, none of the big companies today will exist in 2050. So I tried to think, given some of these trends, what will the top 10 companies in 2050 be like? So here you go. Number 1, Exxon Hydro. So it's still a big natural resources company, but it's water that is now the really valuable resource, not oil. And maybe actually, given that Apple has overtaken Exxon as the biggest company, this will be iHydro. But anyway, Exxon Hydro, number 1. Number 2, Tata Soft. Tata Soft, big Indian company, takes over Microsoft and becomes the giant of software. Number 3, GGS, this is called. I don't know whether Goldman Sachs sort of got into trouble because of calling its customers Muppets, but anyway, Google takes it over because it knows everything about people's spending intentions and is brilliant at risk management. Number 4, sovereign wealth funds are becoming very important, and Qatar Holdings buys up anything that's very rich with gas. Number 5, China still dominates the world of car making. Shanghai Automotive is the category killer there. Number 6, I can't even pronounce this. GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Teva, Novartis, Daiichi, whatever. It's the logical extension of the biotech industry. Number 6, education, a huge business. We all say this, but it'll be interesting to view it as much more of a business, and Oxbridge, Harvard will be the unbeatable combination. Apologies to Berkeley. And then 2 startups that go from nowhere in much the same way as we've seen the likes of Google and now Facebook and Twitter come from nowhere. Human resources, a social network to match the talents of the world, Talentiate. Another one, the category killer in the area of 3D manufacturing, which I was describing earlier. Let's call it Manuvation. And then finally, the company to end all companies in education, the combination of Bollywood and Hollywood. So there you are, just a bit of something to sort of get you thinking.